The British monarchy has just unleashed its most powerful weapon, silence. But this time, King Charles is no longer sitting quietly on the sidelines. After days of humiliation and political chaos, the king has made his move. And insiders say it's nothing short of a royal strike back. What began as a shocking outburst from Carr, a declaration of war against centuries of royal tradition, has now ignited a constitutional inferno. And behind the closed doors of Buckingham Palace, something extraordinary has happened. Something Britain hasn't seen in generations. According to multiple senior insiders, King Charles has taken direct action to defend the crown's honor, setting off a chain reaction that could destroy Starmer's government once and for all. The backlash against Keir Starmer was already spiraling out of control when reports began emerging of a mysterious royal meeting late last night. It wasn't a public event, not a photo opportunity, not another bland press statement. This was different. The king, furious yet composed, summoned his closest advisors, including the Lord Chamberlain, senior members of the Privy Council, and even legal experts from the palace's constitutional team. Witnesses say the meeting lasted deep into the night, lit only by the dim golden lamps of the palace's private study, and what was discussed inside those walls has now sent shockwaves through Westminster. One royal aide speaking under strict anonymity said His Majesty believes the Prime Minister has crossed a line that no leader should ever cross. The monarchy must now defend its dignity and its survival. Those words spread like wildfire among political circles, and within hours Parliament was in panic mode. For generations, the unwritten rule of British politics has been simple. The monarchy stays out of politics and politicians respect the crown. But Starmer's furious tirade, his reckless insults against the king, shattered that fragile peace. And now it seems King Charles has chosen not to ignore it. According to leaked correspondence, the king ordered a full review of the constitutional options available to the crown, a move not made since the 1930s abdication crisis. The document, reportedly titled Operation Sovereign Integrity, outlines possible royal responses should a sitting prime minister threaten the institution itself. And when word of this reached Downing Street, panic erupted. Senior Labour officials were stunned. They couldn't believe the king was actually moving to reassert his authority. An insider described the mood in Starr's office as sheer disbelief turning into fear. But the king's response didn't stop with quiet meetings. Early this morning, royal staff delivered sealed letters to the leaders of the opposition, the Speaker of the House of Commons, and senior judges at the Supreme Court. Their contents haven't been publicly disclosed, but sources close to the palace say the letter emphasized the importance of protecting Britain's constitutional balance and warn against any attempt to undermine the monarchy's role. That alone would be historic. A direct communication from the sovereign to Parliament, effectively a royal warning. Within hours, news of the letters leaked and the public went into a frenzy. Hashtags like King Strikes Back and Defend the Crown surged across social media. Suddenly, the story wasn't about Starmer's anger. It was about the king reclaiming his place. Meanwhile, Starmer's inner circle was collapsing. Ministers began openly questioning whether the Prime Minister had gone too far, and the whispers of resignation grew louder. Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner reportedly stormed out of an emergency cabinet session after clashing with Starmer over how to respond to the palace's actions. She wanted an apology. He refused. One witness said she told him flatly, "You've made yourself the enemy of the people." Starmer's face, they said, turned pale. He realized too late that this wasn't just a political crisis. It was a battle for legitimacy itself. Britain's traditions run deep, and no leader survives by waging war against the crown. The turning point came when the BBC interrupted its regular programming for a special report, the first public response from Buckingham Palace since the scandal erupted. The king didn't appear on camera, but the statement was unmistakably firm. His Majesty remains committed to the unity and stability of the nation. He holds deep respect for Britain's democratic institutions and expects the same respect to be shown toward the crown. Just 26 words, yet their meaning was seismic. The palace didn't name Starmer. It didn't have to. The message was clear. The monarchy would not be disrespected, and it would not remain silent. Within minutes, commentators on every network were calling it the most powerful royal intervention in modern history. Across Britain, the mood shifted dramatically. What had started as outrage against Starr's words now transformed into a patriotic wave of support for the king. Crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace holding banners reading "Stand with the Crown and Defend Our King." Church bells rang in several towns, spontaneous gestures of solidarity Even in northern Labour heartlands, where Republican sentiments sometimes linger, citizens voiced disgust at Starmer's behavior. A taxi driver from Manchester summed it up best in an interview. "You can argue about policies, but you don't insult the king. That's not politics, that's betrayal." Inside Downing Street, Starmer watched it all unfold like a man cornered by history itself. Every attempt to control the narrative failed. Press officers scrambled to issue clarifications, but none could erase the damage. The more he spoke, the worse it got. Meanwhile, opposition parties seized their chance. Nigel Farage appeared on national television, calm and deliberate, praising the King's dignity and reminding viewers that Reform UK had always defended traditional British values. His words landed like thunder. When our institutions are under attack, silence is not neutrality, it is strength, and the King has shown strength today. Overnight, Farage's approval rating soared, and even conservative backbenches began hinting that perhaps the time had come for new leadership, not just of the government, but of the nation's entire political direction. By the end of the day, one thing was undeniable. King Charles had struck back, not with anger, not with fury, but with quiet, calculated authority. And that was far more devastating than any speech could have been. For the first time in decades, the balance of power in Britain had shifted, and the man who once thought he could challenge the crown was now watching his empire crumble before his eyes. As the nation awoke to the palace's stunning statement, the shockwave spread through every corner of British society. Newspapers hit the stands with front-page headlines screaming "King Strikes Back" and "Royal Warning to Star." The morning talk shows were electric with debate, former ministers and historians arguing about whether the King's statement crossed the invisible constitutional line or simply restored the moral balance of the nation. But the public wasn't interested in legal technicalities. They had already chosen their side. Polls taken that very morning showed an overwhelming swing in favor of the monarchy, with nearly 80% of Britain saying the King had done the right thing by defending the crown. The same poll revealed something even more devastating for Starr. 68% believed he was unfit to continue as Prime Minister. Overnight, he had gone from leader to liability. In Whitehall, the air was thick with tension. Starr's aides moved nervously through the corridors, whispering updates and exchanging fearful glances. The Prime Minister, once confident and commanding, now sat isolated behind his desk, staring at piles of briefing papers he couldn't bring himself to read. Every hour brought new resignations. Junior ministers fled the sinking ship, citing a loss of confidence in leadership. Senior officials at the Cabinet Office began preparing contingency plans for a possible caretaker government, a phrase not uttered in Britain for decades. The civil service, known for its neutrality, had quietly turned against him. "We're witnessing a government collapse in real time." One insider remarked, "No one wants to be tied to this disaster." Meanwhile, outside Westminster, the people made their voices heard. Massive crowds gathered across London, waving flags and singing, "God Save the King." Trafalgar Square overflowed with supporters of the monarchy. What was striking wasn't just the size of the crowd, but the diversity. As young and old, working class and middle class, conservatives and disillusioned Labour voters, all united under one banner: loyalty to the crown. Across social media, videos of people saluting portraits of King Charles went viral, accompanied by the defiant hashtag Britain Remembers. For many, this wasn't merely a political event. It was a cultural awakening, a moment when ordinary citizens felt they were defending their heritage from those who sought to tear it apart. The opposition seized the moment with ruthless precision. Nigel Farage and Reform UK held a press conference outside Parliament that drew global attention. Dressed in a simple navy suit, Farage stood before a wall of microphones and declared the British monarchy has stood for unity through centuries of turmoil. It's not the king who forgot his place, it's the Prime Minister who forgot his duty. His words struck a nerve. Within hours, donations to Reform UK surged again, pushing the party's campaign funds to record levels. Meanwhile, Conservative leader Rishi Sunak, cautious but calculating, issued a carefully worded statement praising the enduring wisdom of the crown and calling for a restoration of trust and dignity in public office. To political analysts, it was clear both the right and the populist wave were aligning behind the king, leaving Starr completely alone. Inside Labour's headquarters, panic turned to fury. Party veterans accused Starmer of dragging Labour into an identity crisis it might never recover from. Leaked recordings from an internal meeting revealed members shouting at each other, with one MP reportedly yelling, "He's turned Labour into a Republican experiment and we're paying the price." The atmosphere was toxic. Starr's inner circle fractured completely. Angela Rayner stopped returning his calls. Rachel Reeves began quietly meeting with senior MPs to discuss transition leadership, and several prominent backbenches demanded a vote of no confidence. The once loyal party machinery was grinding to a halt, and every rumor of defection to Reform UK made the cracks wider. At the same time, Buckingham Palace was operating with cold, strategic precision. Courtiers began quietly reaching out to senior Church of England figures and Commonwealth representatives to enforce the message that the monarchy remained a unifying force. The Archbishop of Canterbury, after days of silence, finally issued a statement of support, declaring that the crown stands as the enduring symbol of our shared faith, unity, and moral foundation. His words added spiritual weight to the king's position and further isolated Starmer. The monarchy wasn't just winning a political argument, it was reclaiming its moral authority over the soul of the nation. International reactions only deepened the crisis. American and European news channels ran constant coverage of the unfolding royal showdown, painting Britain as a nation on the edge of constitutional collapse. CNN. Analysts called it the most dramatic royal political confrontation since the days of George III. The Australian press hailed King Charles as the monarch who finally fought back. Even the Canadian Parliament issued statements reaffirming their respect for the monarchy, an implicit show of solidarity that embarrassed Downing Street. Foreign diplomats stationed in London reported growing uncertainty, with some even speculating that the British government could fall within weeks. And yet through it all, King Charles remained silent once again. No interviews, no appearances, no speeches. His calm was the sharpest contrast to Starmer's unraveling image. Every photograph of the king, serene and dignified, deepened the perception that he represented order in a moment of chaos. Public trust in the monarchy soared to levels not seen in half a century. Commentators began to describe the king's strategy as the art of invisible dominance, doing nothing publicly, while letting his adversary collapse under the weight of his own arrogance. By the end of the week, Starmer's authority had all but disintegrated. Senior Labour figures were openly preparing for succession. The media had turned fully against him, and Parliament was preparing for what many predicted would be an inevitable leadership challenge. The monarchy, once thought to be powerless in modern politics, had just proven it could still move the earth when provoked. King Charles had struck back, not with anger, not with scandal, but with timeless patience. And it was working. Britain, stunned and divided, could feel history shifting beneath its feet. And somewhere inside Buckingham Palace, behind closed doors, the king watched in silence as his quiet counterstrike began to write the story of modern Britain. By the time the following week began, Westminster was a political battlefield. The palace's silent defiance had reshaped the nation's mood, and the once unshakable authority of Starr was collapsing faster than anyone thought possible. In the early hours of Monday morning, the corridors of Downing Street were eerily quiet. Staffers whispered about letters of no confidence circulating through Labour ranks. News cameras camped outside the gates, waiting for the inevitable downfall. Each passing hour brought new rumors, an emergency party meeting, a mass defection, or even an imminent resignation speech. That morning, an extraordinary event took place at Windsor Castle. For the first time in decades, the king summoned the Speaker of the House of Commons and senior Privy Councillors to a private consultation. No chimeras were allowed, but the very act of calling them sent tremors through Parliament. The palace released a brief note, afterwards stating simply that His Majesty has been apprised of the current situation and remains dedicated to the preservation of constitutional order. Those 21 words were enough to ignite a political firestorm. Analysts interpreted the phrase preservation of constitutional order as a direct signal that the king was ready to act if the crisis deepened. Some speculated that Charles was quietly preparing to dissolve Parliament or appoint a caretaker government should Labour implode. Constitutional experts reminded the public that the monarch technically retains reserve powers, rarely used but very real. And Starmer's critics began openly calling for those powers to be tested. Inside Labour's headquarters, chaos recede. Angela Rayner, now effectively leading the internal rebellion, met privately with senior MPs late that night. According to multiple leaks, She declared that the party could no longer defend a man who declared war on Britain's most beloved institution. Rachel Reeves and Yet Cooper were reportedly present, and both agreed that Starmer's leadership had become unsustainable. By morning, Reina's allies had gathered more than half of the signatures needed to trigger a leadership vote. Starmer's political death sentence had been written, and everyone in Westminster knew it. Hettried to rally his cabinet with one last desperate plea, insisting that the monarchy's silence was being weaponized by opportunists. But even his most loyal ministers avoided eye contact. They could smell the end. While Labour burned from within, Nigel Farage seized the national spotlight once again. Appearing in live television, he praised the King's restraint and condemned Starmer's arrogance against the traditions that define our nation. His speech was masterful, calm, patriotic, and perfectly timed. Leadership, he said, is not about tearing down what Wayne Reed. It's about defending it. The crowd outside the studio erupted into applause, and within hours the clip was viewed over 10 million times. Reform UK's membership soared yet again, surpassing every record in its brief history. Commentators began asking an unthinkable question. Could Farage actually become Britain's next Prime Minister? The political map of the country was being redrawn in real time, and all of it traced back to one moment: Starmer's outburst against the crown. Even within the palace, the sense of transformation was palpable. Courtiers described the atmosphere as somber putrescent. The king, though outwardly calm, was said to be deeply reflective, aware that his measured stance had not only defended the monarchy, but restored its moral authority in the eyes of the public. Behind closed doors, he continued to receive briefings from constitutional scholars and senior bishops, all reaffirming that the monarchy's silence had preserved stability when politics had failed. Yet some advisors warned that Britain was entering uncharted territory. If Starmer refused to step down, the confrontation could reach an unprecedented breaking point. The king's advisors debated every possible scenario, from a vote of no confidence to the potential invocation of the royal prerogative. For the first time in modern memory, the monarch was once again a central figure in Britain's political destiny. The global press watched every moment with fascination. American networks compared the standoff to a royal chess match, while European analysts marveled at how the British monarchy had outmaneuvered its own government without a single public confrontation. In France, one newspaper headline read, "Palos Pale, the king speaks without speaking." It was a poetic description of the power Charles had wielded through patience and restraint. Meanwhile, back in Britain, the BBC aired a special documentary tracing the history of monarch-prime minister conflicts, drawing parallels between Starmer's defiance and past crises that had reshaped the kingdom. The tone was unmistakable, or history was repeating itself and not in Starr's favor.